In the second chapter of Nehemiah, we find lasting lessons of faith and leadership, emphasizing God's guidance and His provision, albeit through an unlikely source. Uniting God's people toward a shared goal through perseverance in the face of opposition is evident, as we see that there will always be unhappy people, even when we are in the middle of doing God's will. And now, here's Pastor Todd.
Thank you for joining us for the midweek message. We're looking at the return of the children of Israel as they come back from the Babylonian captivity. We've looked at Ezra last time. Now we're looking at Nehemiah. We began Nehemiah last week, and we talked about the idea that his friends had come to visit him, and they had shared with them the state of Israel, state of Jerusalem. The city walls are torn down. The temple is not in perfect shape. It's been rebuilt, but it's still not in perfect shape. And so the people around would come and attack the city from time to time, or there was no way to protect the city. And when Nehemiah hears this, he immediately goes into a time of prayer, and he just goes before the Lord, and he asks the Lord to move. And it's interesting because in asking the Lord to move, he also pleads with the Lord to forgive sins, including himself. He didn't just say their sin, our sin. And then he connects with the Lord on a very personal basis. At the very end of that phrase, he uses the idea of who he is. He says that he is cupbearer to the king. In other words, God has placed him at one of the highest positions in the Persian government. He's right there with the king, in the king's presence, probably on a daily basis. In Nehemiah chapter 1, we're going to move down to verse 11, and I just want to remind us of this one verse. It says, "O Lord, I pray, please let your ear be attentive to the prayer of your servant and the prayer of your servants who desire to fear your name, and let your servant prosper this day, I pray, and grant him mercy in the sight of this man, for I was the king's cupbearer." By the time he gets through with this prayer, he understands that God may be using him for, as Esther said, for such a time as this. So in Nehemiah chapter 2, we find him before the king. This is when he has an opportunity. Now, I love this part because it's one of those times when a quick prayer takes place and God moves, and he takes the opportunity, and because he's been praying ahead of time, he's prepared for this moment, and when God brings the moment together, this preparation that he's done leads him to the answer that he's been seeking. So in Nehemiah chapter 2, verse 1, it says, "And it came to pass in the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, that I took the wine and gave it to the king. Now I had never been sad in his presence before. Therefore the king said to me, Why is your face sad, since you are not sick? This is nothing but sorrow of heart. So I became dreadfully afraid, and said to the king, May the king live forever. Why should my face not be sad, when the city, the place of my father's tombs, lies in waste, and its gates are burned with fire?" There are a couple of things I want to point out here. The first thing is I want you to understand God has answered Nehemiah's prayer, and he answers with a unique opportunity for Nehemiah himself to be involved in the solution. It took a very brave step for Nehemiah to step into the solution. And he says so when he says at the end of verse 2, "So I became dreadfully afraid." What was he afraid of? He's afraid because anyone in the king's presence could be put in prison, killed, or just simply banished away from the king if they were sad in his presence. The king wanted to be positive. The king did not want negative people around him. And so if negative people came around him, he could have them killed, he could have them in prison, or he could just have them banished so that they never came to his presence again. Nehemiah said, I'd never been sad around the king. I can guarantee you that makes you have a new outlook when you realize what's at stake. Nehemiah said, I've never been sad before the king. So when he was sad on this day, he realized this prayer that he's been praying, This pain in his heart that he's been feeling, it now is calling for action. So in that moment, he gives this incredibly quick prayer and he gives this powerful prayer, but it also shows in this prayer and this relationship that Nehemiah has, both with the king and with God, they're coming together right here in this moment. And that God had been working through Nehemiah for a long time. You have to understand, when you see how quick this prayer is, you realize Nehemiah realizes God has put him in this place with reason and purpose. So let's look at this. Verse 4. Then the king said to me, "What do you request?" So I prayed to the God of heaven. I love that. That's all we have. I prayed to the God of heaven. This is one of those quick, immediate, prayers that you pray sometimes. I prayed to the God of heaven. And I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, I ask that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's tombs, that I may rebuild it." Then the king said to me, the queen also sitting beside him, "How long will the journey be? When will you return?" So it pleased the king to send me, and I set him a time. I love this. Nehemiah recognized his prayers prayed beforehand were emphasized in the quick prayer that he prayed. God used me, I'm sure, something like that. And now he speaks to the king with boldness. He realizes he's in God's will. I want to tell you, there's no greater place to be. And it gives you a boldness that you would not normally have. To spend time with God on a daily basis when there is no crisis gives us confidence when the crisis comes to boldly move for God. Here he speaks to the king and he's bold in what he says. I would like to go home. I'd like to go back to where my father's tombs are, and I would like to rebuild the city. He didn't say, I want to go visit. He doesn't mealy mouth around. What he goes into is, hey, I want to go rebuild the city. In other words, I want to go, but I want to take something with me. Notice what happens in verse 7. Furthermore, I said to the king, "If it pleases the king, let letters be given to me for the governors of the region beyond the river, that they must permit me to pass through till I come to Judah, and a letter of Asa, the keeper of the king's forest, that he must give me timber to make beams of the gates of the citadel, which pertains to the temple, for the city wall and the house that I will occupy." And the king granted them to me according to the good hand of my God upon me. I want you to notice how he gives God the praise for this. He doesn't say, I was a great speaker, I spoke at the right moment, oh man, I knew the right thing to do. He says, all that happens, we give God the credit. Also, I want you to notice that this is the third leader that God is sending back to rebuild this city. It's amazing how God continues to send leaders, but not only did he send leaders, but each time he sent leaders with direct authority in the Persian government, and the government of Persia is paying for the rebuilding of Jerusalem and of the temple. Isn't that just like God to work in such a miraculous way? Who would have thought the Persians would rebuild anything for Israel? But that's exactly what's taking place. Once Nehemiah has this, he knows what to ask for. He asks for the papers to give him permission to travel. He asks for materials that the king could provide. And now he's ready to take his journey. So in verse 9, it gives us a quick glimpse. You'd think, oh man, this is all positive and God is moving and everybody's for it. The king's excited. Nehemiah's excited. Materials have been delivered. You can just imagine the excitement that's there. You can say, well, man, everybody must be excited. I want to tell you, when God begins to move, there's always a group that's not happy. I don't care whether you're in the church, in your family, there's always a group that no matter what, they're against whatever's going on. And he has a group as well. In verse 9, it tells us about this group. It says, "Then I went to the governors of the region beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent captains of the army and horsemen with me. When Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite, officials heard of it, they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. Now notice this. They're not upset that the king sent him. They're not upset that there's going to be material sent. They're upset because he's looking out for the well-being of the children of Israel. They don't want the Israelites to come back to their city. Why? Because they fear that one day they'll become great again and they will overrun those around them. When you do something great for God, there are a couple of things here that I think we can walk away with. Number one, bathe it in prayer. If you will bathe it in prayer before you take action, when you do take action, you can have confidence that what you're doing is within the will of God. Number two, when you bathe it in prayer and the opportunity arises, don't be afraid to step through. So many times I'm afraid Christians miss out on the power of God in their lives because they are too slow to respond when God has obviously given them an opportunity. And number three, when you step out for God, do not be surprised when other people are not excited. There's going to be people stand up against you. Nehemiah has it here. It's beginning now, and it's only going to get worse. When you do something great for God, Satan is never going to leave that alone. So don't be discouraged by those who stand against you. I hope you have a great week. Thank you for watching.